What's up, kings and queens? It's Dan from Daft Previews, and I'm back yet again for another comprehensive preview for all the NBA player props on this upcoming 7-game slate. As always, I'll be taking you through all the players' form lines. We'll go through their props. We'll talk about their matchups. Whoever's got a good matchup, I'm going to call it out. Whoever's got a difficult one, you'll hear that too. And I do all this to give you all the information that you need to make the most informed decisions possible, whether you're betting parlays, multis, singles. I've got you covered. Now, we'll use this analysis once again. Had an okay day. A couple of players were void, but we cashed on Nurkic assists. We hit a same-game parlay for the Rockets versus Pacers game, and we're one Colin Sexton point away from securing another parlay and the Thunder versus the Jazz. But we're back in the lab. We'll get through all this data, and if you want to see all my bets, you can check the pinned comment. Let's go! We're kicking it off with the Toronto Raptors and the Charlotte Hornets. First player that I wanted to talk through today is Emmanuel Quickly. Now, the Hornets, they allow the 5th most rebounds to point guards at the moment over the last 30 days. With Emmanuel Quickly, we'll go through all of his form lines and see if we can find any juice on the board. His line's at 16.5. He's covered this in 5 of his last 10 and 2 of his last 5. Points-wise, did score 23 points in his last matchup against the Hornets. He's covered this in 2 or 3 games so far this year. If we want to jump to his rebounds, so only covered in 2 of his last 6 against the Hornets. 2 or 3 this year, though. He's hit this in 4 of his last 10 and 1 of his last 5. Assist-wise, he's hit this in 3 of his last 5 games, averaging 8.8 assists. His lowest total in that 5-game stretch is 6. May not be a bad pick for your parlays. And looking at how he's gone against the Hornets, this season, 9 assists, then 1 assist, and then 1 assist once again. But all 3 of those games was wearing a New York Knicks uniform, averaging more assists now that he's in the starting lineup for the Toronto Raptors. For him to get 6.5, could get close, but for him to get 6, I've got a bit of confidence around that. Let's have a look at RJ Barrett. Now, the Hornets do allow the 3rd most points and the most assists to small forwards over the last 30 days. So having a look at his points prop over his last 10 games, he's hit this 7 times, 3 of his last 5. And up against the Hornets, he's covered this in 4 of his last 6. He did go under in his last 2 games against them, but prior to that, 20.5 plus points, covered that quite easily. Looking at his rebounds, he's covered this in 8 of his last 10 games, averaging 7.3 rebounds. His line's at 5.5. It is a little bit juiced, but I do like it just based off this already. Looking at how he's gone against the Hornets, 3 out of his last 6, but he went under his rebound line in all 3 games against them so far this year. Very similar to Quickly, now in a different destination. He's a Toronto Raptor, and he has been rebounding the ball a lot better in a Raptors uniform. Looking at his assists, where he's got a great matchup, he's covered this in 7 of his last 10, 4 of his last 5. And against the Hornets, he's only covered in 2 of his last 6. He went under in his last 3 games. His actual line in those games, though, was 2.5, which he did cover once. So I think RJ Barrett, all of his form lines are looking pretty good. Obviously, he's gone under in 3 straight games against the Hornets this year. Line set at 30.5, and he's covered that quite well. He's covered his PRA in 8 of his last 10, 4 of his last 5, averaging over 32 points, rebounds, and assists. So Gary Trent Jr., his day-to-day, if he can't have a run, that's more shots for RJ Barrett. So I don't hate that. RJ Barrett, definitely someone I'm going to be looking further into. Next player to look through is Scotty Barnes. Now, the Hornets, they allow the 7th most assists to power forwards. Now, Scotty Barnes, very good passer of the ball. He's covered his assist line in 7 of his last 10, 3 of his last 5. He's covered this in 4 of his last 6 against the Hornets. Last 2 games against the Hornets this year, 10 assists and 7 assists. Line's at 5.5. Doesn't look too bad if you're asking me. One thing I would look into before I make any plays on assists and rebounds, jump onto NBA.com, check out the potential assist numbers to see what's happening in their recent form. Are they moving the ball as much as they once were? To see whether these assists could come. But yeah, I don't mind that for Scotty Barnes. His assists look okay to me. At the very least, 4 assists for your parlays. Looks like a pretty good play. Let's have a look at his points. Line's at 20.5. He's hit this in 5 of 10, 2 of his last 5. He scored 31 and 22 points in his 2 games against the Charlotte Hornets this year. Looking at his rebounds, 10 and 17 rebounds against them. My lord. And then looking into his last 10, I knew that it would look like this because he ain't rebound really good at all. He's been pretty woeful, to be honest. One of his last 10, none of his last five. Has rebounded very well against the Hornets only 2 months ago, but yeah, based on that recent form, I'd be a bit hesitant to take his rebounds and even his points. But yeah, for 4 assists, I would definitely take that for some parlays. But look, just check the final comment, pin comment to see what my final picks and plays are. One player that I wanted to look at is Jakob Poeltl. So he's recently come back from injury. He's 3 games back from injury. He's got an excellent matchup today up against the Hornets, who allow the most points and the third most rebounds and the fourth most assists to centers. We'll start with his points. His line's at 11.5. He's covered this in 2 games against OKC and the Pelicans. So I like that already. And you can get 11.5 points at plus money. He's gone over in 2 of his last 5 against the Hornets. He went under in his last 2. I just wanted to have a quick look to see what type of minutes he's playing since he's come back from injury. 20, 33, 27.7. So he's not on a minutes restriction. His minutes do fluctuate though. But one thing I actually just noticed, these 2 games where he went over 19 and 14 points, he shot 89 and 88% from the field, which is well above his actual average. He's taking 9 or 8 shots. Average over the last 10 is 65%. So if he's taken about 10 shots, he's probably making 6 buckets, which should say he's lining around 12.5. He's at 11.5 for plus money. Look, I don't hate that. 11.5 points for Jakob Poeltl. You got my interest, my friend. Let's have a look at his rebounds, though. Line's at 8.5. He's hit this in 6 of his last 10, 3 of his last 5. He's covered this in his last 2 games. Against the Charlotte Hornets, he's gone under in both of his games this year, but look, it makes a lot of sense if Scotty Barnes is getting 17 rebounds in this game. Might be a bit difficult for Jakob Poeltl, but Scotty Barnes isn't rebounding the way that he used to. So I don't hate that for Jakob Poeltl. Assist-wise, 5 of his last 10, he's covered this 2.5 assist line, and he's covered in 2 of his last 5 against the Hornets. So yeah, I wouldn't take that. Definitely like his points. I don't mind his rebounds, and I don't like his assists. So if we're going to have to pick one, it would probably be his points prop. That's what probably got my interest the most, but might have to do a little bit of digging first. Let's jump into the Hornets players. So we know that LaMelo's still out. Caleb Martin is day-to-day. So Brandon Miller and Miles Bridges, they're going to get a whole lot of usage. These guys combined for like 80 points or something against the Los Angeles Lakers. So firstly with Brandon Miller, his line's at 22.5 points. So despite the massive games he has been having, the line hasn't moved much at all. The Raptors do allow the 9th most points to shooting guards, but they also allow the most points to small forwards. Those positions are very similar in the NBA these days. So Brandon Miller does have a good matchup when it comes to scoring the ball. He's covered this in 7 of his last 10 and 4 of his last 5. Played 2 games against the Raptors already. These are in December, 20 points and 14 points. So in those games, he played 35 and 36 minutes. He shot the ball 15 and 16 times. Over his last 10 games where he's been averaging 23.6, he's playing 33.9 minutes per game, and he's taking 18.2 shots per game. In his last 2 games, though, against Indiana and the Los Angeles Lakers, he's taking 25 shots per game. So based on volume alone, I reckon he's going to score more than a point per attempt based on what we've seen. If we just do some quick maths, he is averaging 17 points against the Toronto Raptors in these 2 games, where he's averaging 15.5 points. So slightly over a point per shot attempt. If we can get him to shoot at least 20 times, 20 to 22 times, it looks like he'd cover this point line. Based on the volume in the last 2, taking 25 shots per game, he could cover this quite easily. So I'm not saying he will shoot it 25 times, but I do think this line's a little bit low. And right now, I'm definitely leaning a Brandon Miller over. Let's have a look at Miles Bridges. So for him, I'll probably look at his points and his rebounds, but we'll have a look at it all anyway because his assist prop does have a good matchup on it. So line's at 24.5. Despite scoring 41 points against the Los Angeles Lakers, his line is still the same, 24.5. The Raptors allow the 4th most rebounds and the 5th most assists to power forward. So points-wise, it might be a little bit more difficult for him in this one, but he shot the ball 26 times against the Los Angeles Lakers. And if he's shooting it 26 times, chances are he's going over. But he scored 22 points in his last matchup against the Raptors. In that game, he shot the ball only 15 times. 15 shots, scored 22 points. He's probably going to shoot it more than 20 times. 24 and a half. I think he can cover that. Rebound wise, he had 8 boards against the Raptors in their last game. In his last 10, he's covered this line in 6 of those games. He does have a good matchup when it comes to rebound, so I don't hate his rebound prop at 6.5. It's actually the lowest it's been in his last 10 games. So, yeah, I don't hate that at all. Assist wise, surprised he's even getting assists when he's shooting the ball 20 plus times, but he's covered this line in 4 of his last 5. He had 3 assists in his last matchup against the Raptors, but you would have to check the box score to see who was playing. We know that Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, they're going to put up a whole lot of shots in this one. So, yeah, I don't mind those players to score some points at the very least, because the Raptors, not the best defensively at this point in the season. So I don't hate that. Let's jump into the next one. It's the Golden State Warriors versus the Philadelphia 76ers. Now, Wiggins, Draymond Green, game time decisions. Joel Embiid, he is still out for this game. Let's have a look at Steph Curry firstly, and that's because the 76ers allow the least points and the 4th fewest assists to point guard. So a difficult matchup in terms of the data over the last 30 days. Let's look at his assists firstly. His line's at 6.5. He's covered this in 5 of 10, but only 2 of his last 5. His last matchup against Philly, 7 assists, and that wasn't too long ago. That was about 8-9 days ago. Looking at his points, he did score 37 points in that game. You can see it here, 37 points. He's covered this points line of 28.5 in 4 of his last 5 games, averaging 38.4 points per game. And looking at his rebounds, 6 of his last 10. He's covered in 4 of his last 5. So he's really getting amongst it, even though the matchup is difficult. This game against Philly, it was supposed to be a difficult matchup as well. He managed to put it on. So I think just looking at his PRA might be a good shot, because he's covered that quite well. He had 52 PRA against the Philadelphia 76ers last up. But yeah, I don't hate that. I think assist-wise, that's probably, I don't love that. Line's at 6.5. He did get 7. You can get his assists at plus money. But points and rebounds gives me a good feeling. He's been rebounding quite well, covered in 4 straight. And points-wise, he's doing a decent job. Memphis, difficult matchup for anybody. But Philly, not going to provide the same type of resistance, especially since they're down on troops. Let's have a look at Tyrese Maxey. Let's check out his points. His line's at 28.5. He's covered this in 2 of 10. He's only covered this in 15 of 45 games this year, so 33%. That last game against the Golden State Warriors, he didn't play in, so there was no Tyrese Maxey in that one. But he's covered his points line in 2 of 10. His rebounds, he's covered that in 2 of 10. And his assists, he's covered that in 5 of his last 10 games. You want to have a look at his PRA, he's covered that in 3 of his last 10 games. So Tyrese Maxey doesn't have a difficult or easy matchup. You just have to take it for what it is. I personally would be leaning his under most nights until Joel Embiid comes back, because it's a very elevated line, and he's shown that he can't produce these numbers on a consistent basis. So leaning the under there. Jonathan Kuminga. Now, I've seen a few people liking his points prop already, and look, makes perfect sense, right? His line's at 19.5. He's covered this in 9 of his last 10 games. The only game he went under, he scored 16 points against the Atlanta Hawks. And Steph Curry happened to score 60 points in that game, and Jonathan Kuminga got fouled out in overtime. So he definitely could have covered his line, provided he played more minutes. But yeah, look, he's killing it at the moment. 9 of his last 10. He's averaging 24.9. He shoots a very high field goal percentage. He gets a lot of buckets in the rim, and he's getting to the free throw line quite well. So automatically, I'm liking this straight away. Matchup-wise, apparently the 76ers allow the 5th fewest points to power forwards, but they also allow the most rebounds. In his last matchup against Philly, he scored 26 points. So I'm not overly concerned about what the matchup says. We know that Jonathan Kuminga is going to get some volume. He's averaging 16 shots per game in his last 10. He's playing a lot of minutes. He's getting to the line. He's shooting at a high percentage. Sometimes he's making some 3-pointers too. He made 1 out of 3 in his last matchup against Philly. But yeah, I am definitely loving Jonathan Kuminga, his points line at the moment. You might even feel like playing a little bit on 25. But for me, I just would probably just take this. Looking at his rebounds, his line's at 6.5. He had 7 rebounds in his last matchup against Philly. He's covered this in 5 of his last 10. And his line's at 2.5. He's hit that in 3 straight, but he's only hit that in 4 of his last 10. So the matchup says rebounds are the way to go, but I think for this Philly Warriors game, I wouldn't worry too much about what the matchup says because Joel Embiid is not there, and that changes everything. So I do like his ability to score points here. If the 76 is going to lack some rim protection, Jonathan Kuminga is the player most likely to punish them. So give me JK, the cum bucket Kuminga. Tobias Harris, let's have a look at him. Points line, 22.5. He's covered in 4 of 10. He scored 26 points in his last matchup against the Warriors. Rebounds, 6.5. He's covered in 2 of 10. He had 10 rebounds in his last matchup against the Warriors. Assists, he's hit that in 4 of 10. And he didn't get many of those. Only 2 assists against the Golden State Warriors when they last matched up. Andrew Wiggins, he's washed. So I'm not even going to look at his props. Kelly Oubre, particularly his points prop. His line's at 16.5. He's hit this in 3 of his last 10 games. Last game against the Warriors, he scored 15 points. So that's not screaming out to me either. Klay Thompson. I wonder, actually, I just thought about Klay Thompson, and my first thought was, how long has he had the exact same goatee for? Anyway, I went off track there. But line's at 16.5. He's hit this in 4 of his last 10 games. Last matchup against the Philadelphia 76ers was last year, and he did have 21 points. But yeah, based on how Klay's playing at the moment, I'm not a fan. I don't feel comfortable taking that prop. So right now, I'm thinking Steph Curry, possibly. Tyrese unders, possibly. I am liking Jonathan Kuminga overs. But I guess when the lines come out for maybe Podziemski, maybe his assist prop might be a good one. Maybe if it's at 5.5, that could be a good look because he's been passing the ball quite well. But yeah, for now, that's all I'm liking so far in this game. Let's get into the next one. It's the Cleveland Cavaliers versus the Washington Wizards. Now, there's great matchups across the board here, purely because the Washington Wizards, their defense ain't great. We know, so Marvin Bagley is still out for the Wizards. Outside of that, everyone else is expected to play from both teams. So let's have a look at it, shall we? Let's kick it off with Tyus Jones. So the Cavs allow the 5th fewest points, 6th fewest rebounds, and the least assist to point guards. So it's just a difficult matchup all around for Tyus Jones. Looking at his points, his line's at 11.5. He's covered in 6 of his last 10. He scored 16 points against the Cleveland Cavaliers in their last matchup. Outside of that, went under every time. He only had 1 rebound, and he only had 5 assists. Looking at his assists in his last 10, he's covered this line at 7 of his last 10 and 4 of his last 5. So he's been passing the ball quite well compared to this line. But one thing to keep in mind that this line is the lowest that you'll see his line, and that's because of the matchup. So 6.5 for Tyus Jones. That is juiced to minus 140. I still wouldn't take the over, but yeah, just want you guys to keep that in mind. It looks like he's been killing it. And the thing is, he's hit 6 assists in 10 straight games, but he's versing the team that allows the least assists to point guards over the last 30 days. So I wouldn't even take him for 6 assists for a parlay. That's just my opinion anyway. Let's have a look at Jordan Poole. He's got a difficult matchup as well. The Cavs allow the 3rd fewest points, the 2nd fewest rebounds and assists to shooting guards. Looking at his points prop, it's at 14.5. He's covered in 6 of his last 10. His 2 matchups against Cleveland this year scored 8 points and 0 points. So he's absolutely struggled. He played 22 to 23 minutes in those games, took 11 and 4 shot attempts. So looking at his rebound prop, he's covered this in 3 of his last 10. Got no rebounds in his last matchup against Cleveland, and 3 in the one prior, so I wouldn't look at that. Assist-wise, he's been passing the ball very well. If you're a better and his line's at 2.5 or 3.5, and you took him for 10 to 7 assists, you'd be laughing. That's crazy money. But line's at 2.5, so I wouldn't play that anyway. I think if you're going to look at Jordan Poole, you mainly just want to look at his points prop. And he has hit this line in 23 or 47 games this year, but has not come close to hitting that against the Cleveland Cavaliers this year. So very much leaning to the under in this one, but given 7 games, I'm sure we can find some juicier overplays, which will be more enjoyable to ride. Let's have a look at Kyle Kuzma. Now, the Cavs allow the 7th fewest assists to power forwards. So on his assist numbers, he has hit this in 8 of his last 10, but he has struggled to get any assists in his last 2 games. Up against the Cavaliers, he's gone under 3.5 assists in 4 consecutive games. So, not saying take the under, but be cautious when taking the over, because even though he's producing assists like this, he may not produce any assist up against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Last two, he's versed two very good defensive teams, Clippers and the Miami Heat, and he struggled. Cleveland Cavaliers, one of the better defensive teams as well. They allow the third fewest assists per game, and they obviously don't allow many assists to power forwards either. So that's Kuzma's assists. Let's have a look at his points, though. His line's at 21.5. He's hit this in 3 of his last 10. But he struggled against the Cleveland Cavaliers. So went under in both games so far this year. So that's a difficult one. Rebound-wise, he struggled to get rebounds against them too. And in his last 10 games, he's hit this in 4 of his last 10. So look, given his challenges in all areas, you might just look to take a Kyle Kuzma under 31.5 PRA. He has hit that in 5 of his last 10 though. But he's averaging 15 PRA in these last 4 games against the Cleveland Cavaliers. In those games, he only played 22 and 25 minutes. So I think that's something to keep in mind, because lately he's been playing 33 minutes, but there's obviously a blowout factor as well, which could impact this one. So, yeah, look, I still don't mind it. Kyle Kuzma under in his PRA perhaps, but again, who wants to take unders? Fuck, not me. Let's have a quick look at Gafford and his rebound line. The Cavs are now the 5th fewest points and the 2nd fewest rebounds to setters. He has been rebounding quite well, I must admit. He's averaging 11 rebounds per game in his last 5. He's hit this in 4 of those games. And against the Cavs, he has struggled to rebound, though. So keep that in mind. Points-wise, he's covered his points line in 8 of his last 10, averaging 11.9. And he has hit in 2 of his last 5 games against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Let's get to the Cavs players so we can start to talk about overs. Darius Garland, the Wizards allow the 3rd most assists to point guards. Garland is now 4 games back from his injury. His minutes are starting to lift up, 27 minutes against the Sacramento Kings. Points line is at 15.5. Rebound-wise, he's hit this in 3 of 10. So no one's looking at his rebounds. Looking at his assists, line is at 5.5. He's covered this in 1 of his 4 games since he returned from injury. And he had 9 assists in his last matchup against the Washington Wizards. So, yeah, look, his recent form doesn't say that he can get these assists, but we do know that it is an easy matchup. What am I talking about? An easy matchup up against the Washington Wizards, who allow the most assists overall in this season, but they also allow the 3rd most assists to point guard. So Darius Garland to get 6, I'm not too sure, but there is some confidence in me that says he could definitely get 4 if you're looking at some parlays. Let's have a look at Donovan Mitchell. The Wizards allow the 5th most points, the 6th most rebounds, and the 2nd most assists to shooting guards. Now, this guy can rack up some assists as well, but his line is at 6.5. He's hit that in 8 of his last 10, and he hasn't got the assists against the Washington Wizards in their 2 matchups this year. Had 4 assists in both of those games, so didn't pass the ball very well, but he might have scored a lot of points. That's not true. He scored 22 and 26. He's covered his points line, though, in 6 of his last 10, 4 of his last 5. Rebound-wise, he's covered that in 6 of his last 10, but only 2 of his last 5. But he went under in his last 2 games for rebounds against the Washington Wizards. So what we see is Donovan Mitchell does have a great matchup against the Cavs, but he hasn't produced in the 2 games he's played against them. Against the Washington Wizards. He hasn't produced in the games that they've played this year, but he probably hasn't had to, because other people are probably dominating. Let's talk about those other 2 who could be dominating. First one, Evan Mobley. So the Wizards allow the 5th most points and the 6th most rebounds to power forwards. Looking at his points prop, it's 13.5. He's covered that in 5 of his last 10. I think he's 4 games back from his injury. Had 1 monster game against the Spurs, has gone under in the other 3. Has had some success against the Washington Wizards in the past, but didn't verse them this year. Rebound-wise, he's covered that in his last 2. Line is at 9.5, and you can get that for plus money. And assist-wise, he's hit that in 3 consecutive games now. His line's at 2.5, and I don't mind him to go over that, that's for sure. 4 assists against the Pistons, 3 against the Spurs, and 7 against the Sacramento Kings. Like I said, the Wizards allow a lot of assists. Doesn't matter who you are, you can probably get them against this team, so I don't mind that for Evan Mobley. Last player is Jared Allen. Wizards allow the 2nd most points and the most rebounds to centers. Now, his line's at 16.5. It hasn't really fluctuated too much over these last 10 games. He has hit this in 6 of his last 10, 3 of his last 5. 2 games against the Wizards this year, he scored 17 and 12. Rebound-wise, 19 and 12 rebounds, so he's had some great rebound performances. He's hit this in 5 of his last 10, but only 2 of his last 5. Evan Mobley is back. He's playing a lot more minutes. That should reduce the number of rebounds Jared Allen's going to get. So let me just have a look here. How does Jared Allen perform? His last 10 games with Evan Mobley, he's only gone over this line in 3 of his last 10. So even though he has been rebounding well in general, check it out. His numbers without Evan Mobley, he's gone over in 7 of his last 10. So it's quite a massive swing, averaging 12.4 without and 10.9 with Mobley in the lineup. I personally won't be playing Jared Allen for any rebounds. Points-wise, I can fuck with that, I can take Jared Allen on his points looking at this, but definitely not liking his rebound prop, that's all. Let's jump into the very next game. It's the Atlanta Hawks versus the Boston Celtics. Now, in this one, DeAndre Hunter is a game-time decision. Clint Capella is out. Drew Holiday is a game-time decision as well for the Boston Celtics. But a lot of players to look at here. The very first one, we'll go with Trae Young. Celtics allow the second most rebounds to point guards. Trae Young, not a notable rebounder, as you can see. He's gone under this line in 8 of his last 10 games. So fuck the rebounds right off. Let's look at his points. His line's at 24.5, and he's been scoring very well. He's covered it in 6 straight games. He's averaging 26.8 points in his last 10. Last 9 games against the Boston Celtics, he's gone over 7 times. If we just go to the regular season only, he's covered this points line easily in 3 consecutive games against the Celtics in the regular season, including 33 when they played in November last year. Looking at his assists, he's had 9, 13, and 7 assists against the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics don't allow many assists, to be honest. But looking at his last 10, Trae Young's covered this in 8 of his last 10 and 4 of his last 5. So definitely capable. I do lean his points rather than his assists, but I think something safer would probably just look at his points and assists. His line is at 34.5. He's covered that in 6 straight games. And he's covered that in 3 consecutive regular season games against the Boston Celtics. So, I don't mind that one at all. Trae Young to cover his points and his assists. Let's have a look at DeJounte Murray in this one. The Celtics allow the 3rd most rebounds, but the 7th fewest assists to shooting guards. Let's have a look at his points prop firstly. Struggled against the Celtics. He's killed it in his last 10. He's covered this line in 9 of his last 10 games, averaging 23.8. So he did only score 6 points in his last game against Boston. He played 34 minutes. He took 13 shots, and he only made 2 of them. So probably an anomaly, because looking at his last 10, he's averaging 20 shot attempts per game pretty much, and he's making 9.1 of them. He's making some threes, making 2.1 3-pointers per game. So, look, if you're just looking at recent form, DeJounte Murray can get it done, but he has struggled against the Celtics in the past. You might have the Derek White matchup or Drew Holiday, whoever it may be, probably going to make it a bit difficult for him. So, when I look at this, I wouldn't confidently take him for 20.5 just because he's hit it in 9 of his last 10. I'm having a look at these teams here, and the only one I would say is a good defensive team. Cleveland is a good defensive team, but they don't have good defensive guards. Miami, they don't have good defensive guards either. And neither does the Orlando Magic. They play slow. They have a good defensive team, but it's not because of their backcourt. Neither do the Clippers. So looking at the Celtics, Derek White, Drew Holiday are probably more formidable backcourt defensively. So, look, I'd be quite hesitant to take DeJounte Murray on his points. Looking at his rebounds, I did say that they allow the 3rd most rebounds to shooting guards, the Celtics, but he hasn't rebounded well against the Celtics. He hasn't rebounded well lately. He's covered in 4 of 10. Look at his last 5, and he hasn't rebounded very well either. Assists, he's got a difficult matchup here. He's gone under against the Celtics in 3 straight, but he's gone over this in 4 of his last 5, averaging 7 assists per game. So the matchup is really contradicting the form here. So I think with DeJounte Murray, I'll prefer to just leave it because I don't have the time to really figure this crap out for him. But look, other players on the board we can definitely be looking at here. I want to have a look at, so we know that Capella is out. We can have a look at Okongwu. Let's see how he goes. Rebound-wise, he has covered this line in 2 of his last 10. But the most important thing to look at here is how does he play without Clint Capella? Because we know that this guy can get it done. Without Clint Capella, he's averaging 9. Another player I want to look at is Jalen Johnson from the Hawks. The Celtics allow the second fewest points, but second fewest points and the fourth fewest assists to power forwards. So difficult matchup for Jalen Johnson. Looking at his points, he's covered this line in 8 of his last 10. His line's only at 14.5. He's averaging 17.4 points per game. Both of his matchups against the Celtics were last year, so I wouldn't buy into that too much, but he has been scoring the ball quite well. But based off the last 30 days, the Celtics have been limiting the power forwards to very minimal points. Looking at his assists, I took his assists last. I think I'm taking his assists the last 2 games, and he's done quite well. But he's hit this in 6 of his last 10, 4 of his last 5. But the Celtics don't allow many assists in general, and they allow the fourth fewest assists to power forward. So his line's at 3.5, the same line it was against the Los Angeles Clippers, but now you're going to get this at plus 130. So great odds, and a lot of that has to do with the matchup. I would look into his potential assists to see how often is he passing the ball. Because on pure volume alone, he could definitely still cover this. It's only 3.5. It's not hard. And he's definitely not creating points for others. It could be as simple as if he's just passing it and catching it and passing it to a shooter. Very easy way to rack up the assist. He's just depending on somebody else to make a bucket. Let's have a look at Drew Holiday. So the Hawks allow the 4th most rebounds to point guards over the last 30 days. Assist-wise, though, he's hit this in 4 of 10. He has had good success against the Hawks, but that was last season. So looking at recent form rebounds, he's hit this in 5 of his last 10. No consistency in points-wise, 6 of his last 10. So I think I mentioned this on an earlier video. It's very much a no-sweat bet. Drew Holiday is going to absolutely murder his line, or he's not going to get close. You know, if you could see somewhere with alternate lines, you might take Drew Holiday for 15 plus points, but you might also take him for under 10. Either way, if you get those for $3 to $4, you're going to be making profit. But if he lands in the middle, what's that called? A Polish middle or something, you're fucked. So I'm not saying to do that, but it is quite interesting to see that he always goes way above it or way under his lines, Drew Holiday. Quick look at Derek White. The Hawks are the 7th most assists to shooting guards. So looking at his assists, though, highly inconsistent. He has had great assist games against the Hawks in the past, though. 10, 7, and 11. But in his last 10, 4 times, 4 out of 10. Points-wise, for Derek White, he's hit this line of 14.5 in 7 of his last 10, 3 of his last 5. He's hit it in 3 straight games against the Hawks, but barely. He had 15 points against them earlier this year. So I think maybe assists you could look at, because he had 11 assists against the Atlanta Hawks earlier this year. The Hawks give up a shit ton of assists. I think the 3rd most assists in the whole league. So, and his line's only at 4.5. I think there's some potential for him to explode. Like, this could be a game where you see 3 or 4 Boston Celtics players with 5 to 6 plus assists each. You know, they all start to chip in. Let's have a look at Jaylen Brown. Doesn't have a matchup advantage or anything like that, but let's check him out. Points-wise, lines at 21.5. He's covered in 4 of his last 10. 21 points in his last matchup against the Hawks. Rebound-wise, 7 out of his last 10, 4 out of his last 5. Had 7 rebounds against the Hawks. Assists, 6 of his last 10, and he had 3 assists in his last game against the Hawks. So probably out of all the Jaylen Brown props, maybe his rebounds. I think there could be a good shout there. He's done that quite well over his last 4. Obviously covered this line in his last matchup against Atlanta with 7. His line in that game was also 5.5. So, and at odds at minus 106. I don't hate that for Jaylen Brown. Having a look at Jason Tatum, though. Hawks allow the 3rd most points to power forwards. But points-wise, his line's at 28.5. He's only covered this in 3 of his last 10. He's averaging 26.5 points per game. He did have 34 points against the Hawks earlier this year, so that's positive. Looking at his boards, he's covered in 3 of his last 10. But he had 9 rebounds in his last matchup against the Hawks. And assist-wise, he's covered this in 3 of his last 10, but 3 of his last 5, really. And he only had 4 assists against the Hawks. So Jason Tatum points and rebounds, perhaps that could be a good shout. He's hit that in 3 of his last 5 games, averaging 35.8. But he did have 43 points and rebounds in his last matchup against the Hawks. But I think out of any prop,
I'd probably just be looking at maybe reducing his rebound numbers down for a parlay, perhaps. I just can't trust this guy to score points because one, his shot selection is terrible. He's going to take the shots, but his shot selection is quite poor. So yeah, not a big Jason Tatum fan at this point in his career, but he's got plenty of time to turn shit around. Have a look at Kristaps Porzingis. Now the Hawks are the fourth most rebounds to centers over the last 30 days. So looking at his rebound line, he's covered this in 3 straight, 5 out of his last 10. Hasn't played the Hawks this year though, but he did have 9 rebounds against them last time. Points wise, his line's at 19.5. He's covered this in 3 of 10. So that's not very convincing either. He has scored 15 plus points in 9 of his last 10 games though. So for you parlay bettors, that could be a good option. But yeah, not too much I'm loving out of this one. Let's have a quick look at Bogdanovic and his points prop. His line's at 15.5, and he's been quite consistent. He's hit this in 8 of 10, 4 of his last 5, and he scored 23 points in his last matchup against the Boston Celtics. So, yeah, look, I don't mind that. Bogey, he could get it done, but again, for your parlay bettors, maybe 10 points you could take him for. But yeah, don't mind that whatsoever. Let's jump into the next one. It's a San Antonio Spurs up against the Miami Heat. Now, for this game, Tyler Hero's the only game time decision in this one. He may be ruled out by the time you watch this, but for now, that's what I can see. Let's have a look into it. Firstly, let's look at Trey Jones. He's got a difficult matchup. The Heat allow the 4th fewest points to point guards. His points prop is covered in 6 of his last 10. I don't think anyone would take him for points, but I just wanted to call that out. Assists, you probably want to dabble in. His line's at 7.5. He's hit this in 6 of his last 10, but 4 of his last 5. He's had 6 plus assists in 9 of his last 10 games. Miami are good defensively, meaning they don't allow many points, but they do allow quite a lot of assists. So I don't mind the assist prop or even reducing Trey Jones down to 6 if you want to look at a parlay. I don't hate that. Let's have a look at Devin Vassell. Now, the Heat allow the 4th most rebounds to shooting guards. So looking at his rebounds, very consistent. His line's at 4.5. He's covered 4 rebounds in 9 of his last 10, but he's covered 4.5 in 5 of his last 10. Head-to-head matchups, he had 7 rebounds in his last matchup against Miami this year. So you could get 4.5 rebounds at plus money, and I don't mind that. If you're looking at parlays, maybe 4, but that could get a little bit sweaty for you. Looking at his points prop, though, he's covered this in 8 of his last 10 and 5 of his last 5. But he only scored 14 points in his last matchup against the Miami Heat. So that is an interesting play for Devin Vassell. Let's look at Jeremy Sohan. The Heat allow the 4th fewest points to power forwards. Now, this guy's inconsistent as hell. There are games where he doesn't score at all. There's games where he scores 31. So he's hit this line in 6 of 10. Last matchup against the Miami Heat, he scored 16 points. His line in that game was 10.5. So he absolutely crushed that. Rebound-wise, he's hit this in 6 of his last 10. His line's at 5.5. So you could probably get 4 rebounds at pretty good value for a parlay. But he only had 5 rebounds in his last matchup against the Heat. So that's quite interesting. Quick look at Wemby. The Heat allow the least points to centers. So a difficult matchup. Bam Adebayo is patrolling the middle, but Victor's going to tower above him. He's covered this in 8 of 10. He has gone under in his last 2 games. Cleveland, that was probably the most difficult matchup he's had. Scored 19 points. He did score 18 points in his last matchup against the Miami Heat, old Wemby. And interesting to note, his minutes, he's averaging 28.5 minutes per game in his last 10. That last matchup against Miami, he played 34.5 minutes. He took 22 shots and he only scored 18 points. Chances are he's going to play between 28 and 30 minutes. So he'll play less minutes. He's taking 17 shot attempts per game. So he's going to play less minutes. He's going to take less shots than he did the last time he versed them. It's probably not going to be a very easy night. So I tend to lean to the under on this one for Wemby. Looking at his boards, his line's at 9.5. He's covered this in 6 of his last 10. He got 11 rebounds against the Miami Heat last time around. So this one, I'm probably leaning to the over. But once again, difficult matchup for Wemby. I'm going to look at Bam, though. So I do really like Bam in this one. When I saw the slate, I thought, Bam, big game. But looking at his points, and line's at 18.5. He's only covered this in 4 of his last 10. Head-to-head matchups against the Spurs, he scored 24 points in that last matchup this year. Rebound-wise, he had 11. His line is at 11.5. So Bam Adebayo, despite being half a foot shorter than Wemby, his rebound line is 2 rebounds higher. So, yeah, rebounds 4 of his last 10 and assists. He's hit this in 5 of his last 10. But I don't know. I feel like just certain players, they're just going to turn it on for Wemby. They love the competition. They probably get up for this game and want to test themselves for such a beast in Wembanyama. But I don't mind Bam. Spurs allow the 3rd most points to centers as well. But Bam hasn't been scoring the ball quite well as of late. So that worries me a little bit. Let's have a look at Jimmy Butler. The Spurs allow the 7th fewest points, but the most rebounds to small forwards. Points-wise, he's covered this in 7 of his last 10. He's hit this in 6 in a row. He scored 19 points in his last matchup against the Spurs. Rebound-wise, he's hit this in 5 of his last 10, 4 out of his last 5. He had 6 rebounds against the Spurs. And assist-wise, only 3 out of his last 10. And he only had 4 assists in his last matchup with the Spurs. Terry Rozier, let's have a look at him. Now, the Spurs allow the 7th most points to point guards. Terry has had 2 games over this line. He's covered in 3 consecutive games against the Spurs as well. But yeah, I'm not really feeling Terry at the moment. Rebound-wise, he's been doing that well over his last 4. He's covered that in 4 straight. And assist-wise, yeah, it's a bit up and down. Line's at 5.5. I think if Tyler Hero doesn't play, good chance for Terry to go over in this one. But for now, I'm just still on the fence about Terry Rozier. In the next game, we're looking at the New Orleans Pelicans versus the Los Angeles Clippers. Zion Williamson is a game-time decision for this one. But having a look at this, let's kick it off with Zubac, nice and quick. Now, the Pelicans, they allow the 8th fewest points to centers. Now, he's just came back from injury against the Miami Heat. He only played 18 minutes in that game. His line's only at 8.5, but could be a difficult matchup. And if he's not getting the minutes, it might be hard for him to get these 8.5 points. But for me, I personally don't like playing bets on players who've just come back from injury. He did have 3 rebounds against the Miami Heat. He's actually struggled rebounding against the Pelicans anyway. So now he plays an average of 23 minutes against the Pels. In his return game, how many minutes did I say that he played? 18 minutes. So it's not that much less than what he normally would play, but he has struggled against him in the past. So I won't be playing anything on Zubac for this one. Let's have a look at Kawhi Leonard. Last 10 games, he's covered this in 4 of his last 10, but 4 of his last 5. Head-to-head matchups, he's only covered in 1 of his last 4. Versus the Pelicans twice this year, and he struggled to score. He has rebounded well against them, 8 and 9 rebounds. So obviously Zubac's not getting those boards. Someone like Kawhi would need to. So I don't mind that. Looking at his last 10, he's covered this in 6 of his last 10, 3 of his last 5. So Kawhi Leonard rebounds, that's definitely something I'd be considering. And assist-wise, I wouldn't play his assists, 3.5. He hovers. He doesn't pass the ball that often. He is their main scorer, but he has struggled scoring against the Pels in the past. He has been scoring well lately. Rebound-wise, is probably my favorite Kawhi Leonard prop right now at this minute. I'm going to look at PG. His points line's at 21.5, and he's gone under in 9 of his last 10. So he's struggling, but he scored well against the Pelicans in both games this year, 34 and 24 points. So I think it really comes down to who Herb Jones matches up with. He's a great defender. He's the best defender that they have, the Pelicans. Does Herb Jones most likely pick up Kawhi Leonard? I'm not too sure. But you can actually go into NBA.com, check the box scores. You can check the box scores from the 2 games that they've played already this season, and you can see which players are spending the most time defending who. So that can give you some insight as to what's happening. I know after this game, after this preview, I'll be doing that for sure for this game because I'd be interested to know who is Herb Jones spending most of his time on. So, but Paul George, not scoring well lately, but did score very well against the Pelicans in their last 2 games this year. So right now, I'm on the fence. Rebound-wise, he's covered this in 6 of his last 10. He rebounded well against the Pelicans this year. So both Paul George and Kawhi. Good rebounders, especially if Zubac's not getting them. Assist-wise, he's been doing quite well in his last 4, really smashing this line. But he did go under his assist line in his last 2 games against the Pelicans. James Harden. Now, the Pelicans allow the 6th most points to point guards, but Well, you got one thing you need to remember is the Clippers do have a dynamic point guard off the bench in Russell Westbrook, and he's been playing quite well lately as well. So I'd be interested to see what his points line looks like. But James Harden has been playing quite well. 6 of his last 10, 3 of his last 5. He went under in both of those games against the Pelicans this year. Looking at his boards, 8 of his last 10, 4 of his last 5. He covered in one of those games against the Pels. And assist-wise, he's hit this in 6 of his last 10, 3 of his last 5, and he went over in his assist prop, 10 and 13. So if you're looking at some value plays, perhaps, you might want to look at James Harden under in points, over in assists, because that's what he's done against the Pelicans. His form as of late has been a bit up and down. You've really got to choose the right matchup. But the matchup says that the Pels are giving up points to point guards at the moment. But I don't necessarily think that applies to James Harden. He's not as aggressive attacking the rack as he used to be. But I think just give it some food for thought. Just because he's been scoring well doesn't mean he'll continue to do so. But just because he's played a certain way against the Pelicans, it doesn't guarantee he'll continue to play that way. So again, check the box scores, see what the matchup's like. You've really got to dive a little bit further. This is surface level information to help you. I wouldn't make a final decision just on what I'm seeing on these graphs, but gives you something to really consider. Let's jump into the next one. It's a Detroit Pistons versus Sacramento Kings. Cade Cunningham, Bogdanovic, both game time decisions. Isaiah Stewart is out for this game, so the Pistons continue to be troubled and decimated by injuries. But let's look at Cade Cunningham just in case he does play. So the Kings allow the third most rebounds to point guards. Points-wise, he's struggled. He's gone under every game pretty much since he's come back from injury. Rebound-wise, I wouldn't take his rebounds, even they're at 3.5. They're at 3.5 for a reason. Assist-wise, he's done quite well. He's covered in 8 of his last 10 and 4 out of his last 5. His line has barely moved. Since he came back from injury, his line's been at 6.5. He's covered in every single game since he's come back from injury. Sacramento Kings, they give up the 8th most assists in the league. So I don't mind Cade Cunningham's assist prop if he does happen to play. Next player I want to look at is Jaden Ivey. Now, the Kings allow the third most points to shooting guards. Jaden Ivey has been covering this line in 7 of his last 10, 3 of his last 5, scoring the ball quite well. Versus the Sacramento Kings earlier this year, he scored 22 points. So automatically, I tend to lean to the over. I think he can score 18 to 20 points in this one. So rebound-wise, I wouldn't touch that. Assist-wise, he's covered in 6 of his last 10, but I think his assist numbers have started and tally off because Cade Cunningham is back and Jaden Ivey being aggressive attacking the rack. Let's have a look at De'Aaron Fox. So the Pistons allow the 5th most points and the 2nd most assists to point guards. De'Aaron Fox has been a little bit shaky this year. He's struggling to keep things consistent, has had some good games, has had some poor ones. He's covered his points line in 4 of his last 10. He scored 26 points in his last matchup against the Pistons this year. Assist-wise, he's gone under in 5 consecutive games. He's hit this in 4 of his last 10, and he only had 4 assists against the Pistons earlier this year. So the matchup is great for De'Aaron Fox, but his form on the season, form against the Pistons hasn't been great. It doesn't give me confidence in taking that play. I tend to look for others. Let's look at Sabonis. The Pistons allow the 6th most assists to centers. Sabonis' line in this one is a 9.5. Now, he just rattled off 15 assists against the Cavaliers. His line in that game, I think, was 8.5. 15 assists. Now he's hit the line at 9.5. He had 13 assists against the Pistons in their last matchup earlier this year. I would lean to the over on his assists, but if you're going to take a Domantas Sabonis over on assists, you might as well take a triple-double because rebound-wise, this man is a beast. He had 19 rebounds against the Cavs. He had 10 rebounds in his last matchup against the Pistons. Line's at 12.5. I don't know if I'd take that, but given the Pistons probably struggle to score if they have no Bogdanovic either, there could be a lot of easy rebounds there for Domantas Sabonis. Points-wise, he's hit this in 4 of his last 10. He scored 37 points in his last matchup against the Pistons. So heavily involved in the offense. If he's not going to score 37 points, he's probably going to get 15 to 20 assists. So I don't know. A PRA for Domantas Sabonis. He had 60 in his last matchup against them. He's covered this line in 5 of his last 10, but 4 of his last 5. So Sabonis is definitely singing right now. Has a good matchup. Maybe you lean towards that. Looking at his opposing center, Jalen Duren. Now, the Kings allow the second fewest points to the centers. His line's at 14.5. He's hit this in 4 of his last 10. He has scored 15 and 16 in his last 2 games against the Kings. So I wouldn't say take the under, but I'm not saying take the over either. Rebound-wise, his line's at 11.5. He's hit this in 5 of his last 10, 3 of his last 5. Only had 10 rebounds against the Sacramento Kings last time. So I personally won't be playing any Jalen Duren plays. His lines do seem a little bit high for my liking. But who else is there to look at? Keegan Murray, perhaps? Where's Keegan Murray? Here he is. Now, the Pistons allow they allow the 6th most points to power forwards. Keegan Murray scored 32 points in his last matchup against the Detroit Pistons. Over his last 10, he's been a little bit shaky. He's only hit this in 3 of 10 games, 1 of his last 5. Last game against Cleveland, he scored 10 points. Now, in that game, he scored 10 points in the first quarter and then didn't score a point for the rest of the game. So, yeah, he's got a good matchup. He's done it before, but it's quite weird. He doesn't take many shots sometimes, and yeah, if someone else gets it going, he ain't shooting. What about Harrison Barnes? What if he can turn it on? Let's have a look. Line's at 15.5. He's covered this in 5 of his last 10. He didn't score against the Pistons in the last matchup, but he's taking a lot more shots now. So, yeah, look, I'd be a bit hesitant to take any of these other Kings players. Sabonis is going to pass the ball to somebody, like someone has to score, but I can't tell you who it's going to be. Bogdanovic, his points line's at 16.5. He's a game time decision, let me remind you. He's hit this in 8 of his last 10. He did score 26 points in his last matchup against the Sacramento Kings. So he's got a calf injury, I believe. So, yeah, if he's good to go and he plays his full complement of minutes, definitely don't mind his points prop at all, because the Kings, they're not a great defensive team. They just try to outscore opponents. They do let up the 6th most 3-pointers in the league, and they let teams shoot the 2nd highest percentage from downtown. And if you're thinking about 3-point shooters from the Detroit Pistons, you've only got Bogdanovic and Alec Burks, really. They have Joe Harris, but he never plays. So, yeah, it has to be Bogdanovic. So I'd wait till the lineups are confirmed. If Bogdanovic is in, I don't mind his points prop. Sabonis, his assist prop, get me a little bit aroused. And so does Jaden Ivey's points prop too. So that's a wrap on the preview of the 7 upcoming games. I do hope that this video and all the videos that I do are providing you with some value. Thank you to everyone who's been leaving me some comments. I honestly do appreciate it. Much love from me. Performance-wise, we're doing quite well. So I do need to get my tracker up to date, to be honest. I've been more focused on the content and not so much on keeping my bet tracker up to date. So once I do get that up to date, I'll probably share that on the next video. But things are looking quite nice. If you have any recommendations, do you have any thoughts, anything you want to see in these videos, just let me know and I'll endeavor to make that happen for you. But look, things are blowing up very quick. So the next subscriber goal is for 3,000. I believe we're probably 160 to 170 subscribers away. Look, if you did make it this far into the video, I appreciate you. You watching the video for this long is definitely going to help me get to that goal of mine. So I'll catch you guys in the next one. Best of luck. Gamble responsibly, but not really. It's up to you. Ciao.
Up to the channel because your boy's getting busy. Coming to your line from the west side of Sydney. We've got the free picks and the juice on the daily. It's all free. You don't even have to pay me.